Hi, friends. It's Heidi M, and I'm back in the virtual room with writer and filmmaker Evelyn Lorena. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Evelyn, you are based in the US. You are Guatemalan like myself, and it's nice to be connected, even if virtually. So, for folks that are going to hear or watch this, maybe let's have you introduce yourself in terms of your work and some other fun facts.
Yeah. Uh, as you said, my name is Evelyn Lorena and Guatemalan American, and my parents are both immigrants, so that makes me first generation. I'm an actress and filmmaker, as you said, and most recently I wrote and directed Gabriela, which we're going to be talking about today. It was produced with my production collective Nouvelle Entertainment, as well as um, the Blended Future Project, which is run by Maris Litica. It's a creative agency that focuses on mixed stories. And similarly, so does mine, not necessarily mixed stories, but certainly stories that have felt a sense of otherness. And so
Mhm.
that's a big interest for a lot of our stories. Yeah, I'm originally from Wilmington, North Carolina, like the character in the film.
Yes.
Um, that's where I was, yeah. And but obviously I go back to Guatemala quite a bit, and I love it there. And también hablo español, so we can speak in Spanish if you'd
Yeah, we can
like.
do it. We can do a segue. We can just Spanglishize it or switch altogether. Because that is our real life, right? We
It
navigate.
is. Oh my gosh. Like I was thinking about that the other day where so I was really tired
Hmm.
and I was translating something, and usually somebody asked me recently, they were like, do you think in Spanish when you think, or do you translate it from like a base language? Because my brother, for example, I think when I had asked him, he said, no, I'm still constantly kind of translating it. But for me, I was like, no, I think in Spanish. But I was so tired that that day I was like, this is the first time I've ever had to like physically because I was so tired, and I'd never experienced that before, because usually it's like what you said, you're just kind of mixing everything. But yeah, that was like the first time I felt that anyway.
Yeah, it does happen. I occasionally blank out as well, right? That's
Yeah.
the other thing that happens. I'm like, como se dice? You know what I mean? And then I just think,
My grandmother, the first time I talked to her, I said okay. I think I was like 7 or something. And she didn't know the word okay. She was like, "Kiss okay, kiss okay. What's that?" And I was like, "You don't know what that is." But now it's like everyone would know what
everyone
that is.
uses
But
it.
it was just crazy that she did not know what that meant. Anyway.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, it's great chatting about this because that is
Yeah.
also what you're trying to address in your work. I understand. So you did mention your production collective. How long? I'm curious about that before I get into the film. How long have you had this collective, and what was sort of the impetus of starting it?
So I've had it for a couple of years, and it started with the very first short that I did, that I actually did with Maris. It was called For Her, and I guess it just started out of a need to create different narratives for our community, because at the time I had just moved to LA, and I found that a lot of the things that, on just like a basic level, like obviously when you have a little more clout, you have certain people had access to other kinds of, but I just felt like on like the entry level
Yes.
for a lot of people in the community, it was just a very base understanding of our community. And that worried me because, we're not just all Chola number five, or we're not
You're
just,
right.
having to deal with narcos and things like that, because that's how it's portrayed a lot. And again, a real part of the experience, obviously, but I don't think that that was representative or creating nuance to understand our community better. So I wanted to just see different stories. And for her, the that short, I had written it based on a play, and it
Right.
was directed by my friend Sam Colicchio. But that was like a um, romantic comedy with queer undertones.
Right.
I wanted to just tell something very different, and it didn't address it in like a kind of tokenized way where it's like, this is this kind of story. It was just like a human story, and that
Mhm.
was my goal with it. I'm hoping that's what read. And then after that, Morris was like, I think you should continue doing that. And so then this is our third short together,
Mhm.
um, but the first one that I've directed
Right.
with Gabriela. But that was sort of the idea behind it, is I just wanted something a little more human, a little more nuanced, and um, just showing kind of the universal nature of our experiences. And because everybody, I mean, we think that sometimes, we're very alone or very
Mm.
niche in our experiences, and it's not true. It's like everybody's, there's something to relate to there. So,
Yes, I do appreciate, and I do appreciate that of some of the up and coming filmmakers who are also in this duality, or sometimes even more than duality, right? In terms of
yeah,
identities, right? Because I think it might have been in your notes where you talk about how we are multidimensional. So I think
we
that
are.
is very key, you know. And I think so your first generation, I was born in Guate, but I moved here when I was a kid, so I still felt really
The duality.
in with the Gabriela story in some respects. I can't swim for professionally, but we'll get into that. So with Gabriela, it's you're also in the film yourself as the titular character. When did you decide, or what came first, I guess, in terms of the writing, because you wrote it as well? Did you know that you were going to be playing this young woman who is trying to wrestle with identity and wanting to have
I didn't.
freedoms?
And no, I actually didn't. And we were worried about that in the casting process because it was a very specific thing. Um, and then once I read with Maria, who
Mm,
plays the mother, I think Morris, and then also one of the mentors of the fellowship, because I didn't mention this at the top, but we were part of the Latino Film Institute and Netflix Creative Fund uh, fellowship, and we had mentors. And I think one of the mentors really ushered in how much of this would be a healing process for myself, just because it was so personal in the writing. And then Maris, the producer, also, once he saw me read with Maria, he was just like, I think that there's something here. And I thought, I was a bit hesitant at first because one, I didn't want it to feel like a vanity
sure.
situation. And that was really important to me. So I tried to distance myself as much as I could. But on the other end, I was also hesitant because it's just so much work. Like already acting
Yes.
takes a lot of it. And then you have to direct and then, make sure that you're also in some form also still being true as the writer.
Right.
Um, excuse me. Sorry. But
No, that's okay.
that was really I think that was the thing that got me a little bit nervous. But then once we started, it actually was a little smoother than I thought because of the fact that I did write it. So because I wrote it, I had also a lot of preparation that maybe another actor would not have had.
Sure.
And so that I think made it a little more seamless. So a lot of it was in like, the preparation part. But anyway, but yeah, no, to answer your question, that was not my original
Not the
intention.
original plan.
No,
I'm
no.
glad you mentioned the fellowship and being mentored, because I find that these are really good programs for any filmmaker, I'm sure, at any stage. So what was it? What was that experience like? I know usually these are applications that are kind of competitive in some way, and you know you already mentioned like the one mentor who said it's probably helpful for you to play this
Yeah.
character. What else would you say you took away from this experience?
I would say a sense of confidence because I think going in, because like even when I applied so haphazardly, although, and I mean haphazardly in the sense that I didn't put a lot of pressure on myself. Like I was just like, well, we'll see. I'm really passionate about this story. And it's not like I didn't put my all into the application or into the film. I
Right.
did, but I guess there wasn't the same kind of expectation or pressure. And then it was a pleasant surprise when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, going in, I I didn't feel as confident in the sense that I wasn't like searching for it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was just like, oh, am I, everyone else seemed to have had a lot more experience.
Mm-hmm.
So that made me kind of question for a second. But I think in the process of knowing not only how supportive they were, but the story that came out of it and the way that they molded and the way that I worked with everybody, I
Mm-hmm.
think by the end, I felt a lot more confidence, which is great, kind of like Gabriela.
Yes.
Um, so that made me really happy that I was able to do this. And I think it was also me having a little bit of doubts was not just in my own talent or anything. It was also because physically I was going through all
Mm-hmm.
these health struggles. So
Right.
I just kind of questioned whether it was the right time. Um, but then, like my producer and even my mother reminded me, they were like, you've gone through all this stuff. And then the fact that this happened when you were thinking of maybe even leaving the industry because of the health stuff, she's like, you have to see it in like a almost like a blessing kind of thing. And so I just
Sure.
went full force. And I've been going kind of full force since I got it. So yeah, that's
Oh, that's good to hear. And I mean, I'm sorry about the health issues because no one has plans.
nobody.
That's just
Oh my God.
life. Life shows up and things come up in terms of, kind of
I
hurt.
mean, it's like, yeah, and it's like I don't think people think about it. I mean, obviously, I've thought about it because of what's happened,
Sure.
but I think we take for granted that like life and death are this close. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? They're like so interconnected, and every day that you kind of wake up, there's like the renewed hope, but
Right.
also the threat that it could be over in a second, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I kind of wanted to, I learned a new appreciation of that relationship. And so it made me kind of I actually tried to infuse some of the idea of like, the
Mm-hmm.
existential nature of that into the film in a subtle way. uh,
Yes.
but yeah, it's, anyway.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. The film it is sort of a coming of age. It's a younger character, and as we were saying, she's trying to find strength, courage, and her own voice, I guess, in through swimming, right? And what I really appreciate about the film were the visuals. I do have, before I get into that, I had a question in terms of, was this supposed to, I wrote in my notes, it was like a snippet of a day in the life of Gabriela,
Mhm.
because we come into the story not at the very beginning of her life, but in a particular time in her life. Was that sort of purposeful, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wanted it to feel that way, and I almost wanted it to feel the word I would keep using with Morris when we were editing was I wanted it to feel like vignettes
Oh yeah, okay.
of life, and there's a play on dreams in the short, and so part of it I wanted it to feel semi unreal, but then also very real. But you're kind of like moving in between because that's also I think partly because I wanted to focus on her inner life. That's also kind of how she feels a little bit,
Sure.
where things are kind of dissociated until they come into focus. So there's parts of, that reflecting not only her inner state, but also, the theme of the film, which is, the idea of reaching a dream and an expectation and kind of having that hazy
Yes.
feel throughout the film.
Hmm.
And I did want it to just start because that's kind of how you meet people. You meet people in the middle of where they are. You
Yes.
meet people and you're kind of trying to figure stuff out. Like nothing is very there's certain films where I really love how clean cut, like there's a beginning, middle, and end, and
Sure.
it works for the film. But I
Hmm.
wanted something a little more kind of authentic, but also playing, like I said, on the sort of
Hmm.
dreamscape
Yes.
about it. So
Hmm.
I'm glad that came across.
Yeah, I know, and it's funny because I had to, like I said, sometimes I have to sit with myself after I watch films so that I kind of process what I think, feel, and then I can, especially when I know I'm going to be speaking with someone who's worked in the film, so that
Oh
I
yeah.
can kind of have things to ask about because I'm curious about these things. Where I like the elements of, yes, there's some straightforward narrative parts, but there's also, like you said, these more poet. I think for me, were like poetic like breaks in between, and I guess that's what you mean about the play on dreaming. And
Well,
I
especially when like, well, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was going to say that it's interesting because when you as a person, as a character, spend so much time also on your own, and the way that Gabriela does as well, and also just a lot of it on her own, maybe because she also feels isolated. But I wanted to, like I said, about playing with that inner life and like how you have these moments by yourself and you're sort of processing everything, right? You're
Mhm.
constantly processing, and maybe that's just me, and so it's just like confusing that part. But like,
Mhm.
I do feel that we spend so much time in our heads, and I
Me
wanted to
too.
also portray that a little bit
Hmm.
because um, she spends not only so much time in her own duality, but just on her own. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's part of her character that I related to a lot, even from a
Yeah.
younger me perspective, because I
Okay.
remember having those moments, even the moments where it's not giving away too much when she's trying to match her
Oh, I
yeah.
know, right? Yeah, oh my gosh, I feel like that was so key, that scene, because I feel like that's been like my whole life. It's like, how do you find the match? You know what I
Right.
mean?
I mean, they're
But it's
trying to
like,
do better, as I say, but it's still, you know, we go through our own shades in like physically
internal and
speaking. But
external, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
you're hearing
Mhm.
me. You know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was talking about the visuals and how it looks. There are some really beautiful kind of somebody I know said painterly like visuals.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your cinematographer and who else you worked with to create these nice little vignettes.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked with Xenia Patricia and production designer Emily Marquet, and we really, I think from the beginning, I was, kind of very explicit about it feeling not only like a painting, but very slice of life. Um, and also um, the sense of the dreamscape,
Hmm.
Uh, and they really took to that. And I also emphasized this idea of having a meditative, poetic feel,
Hmm.
which they also were very receptive to. I think it's also in their wheelhouse, so that was a good thing.
Right. Hmm.
Um, I know Emily really focused on the verite parts of it, where she really wanted to bring out the authenticity. And then I think Xenia sort of took that and said, how do I frame this in a way? I mean, we both worked together on that, on how do we frame this in a way that brings out the natural poetry of something that perhaps maybe to like the average eye may not seem extraordinary, but it is.
Hmm.
That's what I really loved is they both understood that sort of duality in each
Yeah.
shot.
Hmm.
And we were able to really, I think, create something really pretty because even, in the moment where she's just lying on the bed playing with the water, like that feels
Right.
like a much more extraordinary moment than
Hmm.
it is for her because she's got that sort of solace and a
Right.
respite for a second. But I also think like in the practical nature of it, you think about it and you're just like, oh, she's just looking at a glass of water and it's,
Yeah.
but we tried to heighten it in those
Hmm.
moments. Mhm.
Yeah. There's a
And
scene that I really appreciated where you're with the lovely Maria Talon who plays the mother, Alma, and at the bus stop. I think it's the bus stop after
yeah,
they go to her work.
mhm.
And let's talk about casting Maria. She, to me, is known from other films that she's done with Jairo Bustamante, and I love her face. Um,
Love her face.
so, how did you connect with her, and what was that dialogue with her behind?
Um, yeah, I knew of her through La Llorona.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, I'd been dying to connect with La Casa de Producción because of, the way that Jairo was coming up with all
Sure,
these great films. He's even got one this year, I think, is that they sent over for Oscar
that's
consideration.
right.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and he's so talented. And anyway, so I reached out because we were looking for a mother character and we wanted it to feel as authentic as possible and have the indigenous roots because that's such a big part of Guatemalan culture and even my own history. And so
Right.
I um, I reached out to them our company reached out to them
Mm-hmm.
and they suggested Maria. And we said, let's read her, let's see. And we didn't have to see anybody else. Like the first time she read, we were like, this is it. Like if she's on board, like we don't need to see anybody else. And, coincidentally, I don't know if I just felt a kinship with her. She felt one. I know she did. And I also felt one, but she also looks kind of like my mother. So I just kind of, I don't know, something about it just
Mm-hmm.
all fell into place. And thankfully it was pretty seamless. But yeah, she was fantastic. Like, I think it's also because, well, one, you know, the sort of Mayan indigenous kind of matriarchal wisdom is there, but
Right.
also I felt like she does a lot of theater
Right.
where she's
Yes, that's right.
from,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like because of that, there's just a deeper understanding of the material too. Just I love working with people who are trained in the theater because, well, one, I'm trained in the theater, but it just I don't know. There's like a deeper understanding to certain things that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you don't get with other actors.
I've heard that. I've heard that from friends who make films, even short films, the same thing. There's a different depth, perhaps, that they bring
Yeah. Hmm.
even just the readings, right? Yeah, I did. I've always liked seeing her on screen, but this is a different role for her too. So it's nice to see her in this again, more real life. I'm sure she's a mother. I'm sure some of this stuff is relatable. You know.
Yeah, she was going through, I think, something similar at the time. And so I think she brought a lot of that to it as well.
Yeah, and I would say just to go back to what you were saying earlier, it is a
Mhm.
snippet of life, and it's also this is the reality of some of our parents in the north of the Americas, right, where they have to come and do the work, and sometimes they are single parents trying to, you know, it's almost like they're so busy it's hard for them to understand their children and what they're going through,
Absolutely.
and you can't
Yeah.
fault them, but at the same time you as the child are like, what do you mean you don't understand? Like you have this there's a tension, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And I feel like for myself, like I naturally also just since I was a little girl would seek out the more, how do I say this in like a way that doesn't sound funny? I guess the more spiritual aspects of life or the eternal aspects of life, like that was always so much more interesting to me, even as a child, which I think was difficult for my parents who not only I think were they raised in a more practical sense, they kind of embodied that coming over here because like you said there's not
Hmm.
time that you're thinking about survival, you're thinking about all these other practical things, and so you get kind of in that world, and so it was I think more difficult to have that connection, especially for me growing up
Hmm.
with them, to express those things,
Sure.
for them to see and understand those more eternal creative aspects.
Hmm.
uh, so I think that was a difficult generational thing, and I wanted to, I think, infuse some of that into the story.
Hmm.
Uh, even though hers was, I think, you know, career-wise, like more of a swimming thing than it was like
Right.
artistic, I guess.
For sure.
Um, but yeah, I think everyone I talk to, they always talk about that with like first generation, where there's this weird disconnect that happens.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. And I will say swimming as a metaphor for anything that we are trying to achieve
Mhm.
for ourselves that our families don't always jive with,
Yeah, yeah.
or even sometimes ourselves wrestle with. So tell me, I know the film is done really great across the festival circuit, and any kind of highlights or moments that have stayed with you from that journey.
Yeah, I honestly I love the Canadian festivals actually, like
Mm,
Imaginative and
yes.
Festival Regard. I think both of them I was able to attend,
Nice.
and see the films. And one, I really loved Canada, but also I just loved the environment that those festivals created. Like it's so fostering of the artist and also the access to resources that they offered you just from
Right.
like the
Hmm.
Canadian arts associations or the different broadcasting networks and things like
Sure.
that. It's not to rag on US or anything, but it's just so different here
Hmm.
in the sense of the way that I guess the society or the government is involved
Hmm.
with arts is so limited.
Right.
which
Yeah, that's true.
that
That's
was,
true.
yeah, so that was really beautiful to see in Canada, I think. And I'm sure that there's, things to work on in
Hmm.
there, but I just was
Always, yes.
pleasant. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with that. And so that's why I think those two festivals were really big highlights because it just felt so supportive in a
Yes.
way that I kind of wasn't used to in the States.
I'm glad to hear that. I have not gone to Festival of Regard, but I do know what you mean by imaginative, and I think it's
Yeah.
also these two festivals are large festivals, but they're
Mhm.
large where you still feel like you're in
Yeah.
community. So I
Yeah.
attend lots of festivals here, and sometimes they're big, and it's too big, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
Like I
these ones,
imagine TIFF is probably like just like a
yeah,
monster.
that I think that's different. Like
Yeah.
going to New York, for example, to one of the big festivals there. But I do find that that's how I feel myself, even somebody attending Imaginative here in the city, where it's like, oh yeah, like it's busy, but it's also there's other activities that foster again those connections, like you said, and the support is there. So I'm glad you had a great time.
I just felt I was in tears, especially at Imagine Native the whole time because, the way that they, place like even elders as part of the screenings and it just, I, yeah, it was a lot.
I think that's maybe I can't speak for everyone else, but I think that might have been my first Imaginative when I went for the first time.
Oh, that you were like
That I
crying.
had all of these like
Oh,
emotions,
yeah. Yeah,
and
I
it's
did.
it's also the idea that North recognizes South, right? So it's a
Yeah.
different way of being seen.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think.
And I was so surprised and I mean, not surprised, but um, pleasant, I guess, like I just felt like it was so beautiful that like Regard, for example, they acknowledged like the North American and
Mhm.
Central American kind of territories versus it being like, just a certain area. And so that
Yes.
was, I really appreciated that because there's so much migration, and diaspora and all kinds of things that happen. And so, you need to find, I think, places for those stories, which I was very appreciative that they welcomed us with that. So,
Mhm. I'm mindful of time. I don't want to run out of time with you,
oh,
but
yeah, yeah. Sorry, go
no,
ahead.
we can take this as a whole other. We can go different ways with this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wanted to ask you. Well, maybe we'll switch to castellano, but ¿qué piensa tu familia del cortometraje ahora que ya tienen una vida diferente?
Y bueno, yo siento que se sienten bien, bien orgullosos porque siento que por años no sabían qué yo hacía, o sea, no entendían la carrera que yo tenía, entonces siempre me preguntaban y yo les explicaba y no lo entendían y creo que esto les dio como algo más práctico para ver, oh, esto es lo que ella hace y lo podían ver así como en un festival. Yo los llevé a unos festivales también,
Sí, sí.
más locales, o sea, no querían ir al Canadá y además mi papá no creo que le hubiera aguantado el frío.
Sí, claro.
Cuando yo fui estaba como a -5, entonces estaba bien.
Ujú.
Me quemé las manos. Pero sí, no, cuando yo se los enseñé, a mi papá creo que más que todos sintió orgullo porque, bueno, a él le gusta cosas que tienen sentido, ¿me
Sí,
entiendes?
claro.
O sea, para que él entienda algo, tienes que tener algo bien profundo para que él lo agarre.
Ujú,
Ah, así como mirar como las historias, así como la de superhéroes y cosas así,
ujú.
no,
No mucho.
no le da nada, no le da nada. Pero algo así, donde es cosas de identidad y cosas más existencial,
Ujú.
ah, se me
Sí.
trabó la lengua. A él, a él le encanta esas cosas. Entonces, para mí, y fíjate que lo siento raro porque a él, como es más práctico, yo presumo que, oh, no le va a gustar eso, pero le encanta esas
Sí,
cosas.
sí. Ujú.
Entonces, él está lleno de contradicciones, pero anyway, él yo y creo que se sintió muy orgulloso y él me lo ha dicho, ¿me entiendes? Que, que, que fue algo que logré que le hace a él sentir bien am, orgulloso y todo eso, y también mi mamá y Mi familia en Guatemala también lo han
Sí,
visto,
claro.
se
Ujú.
sienten, ellos especialmente se sienten orgullosos porque creo que a veces buscan cosas que les dé esperanza del
Sí,
mundo, porque
claro.
a veces es bien difícil, así como en Guatemala ahorita la situación, entonces miran algo y le da como esperanza y eso me
Ujú.
hace muy feliz, ¿me entiendes?
Sí, claro.
Pero sí, yo creo que también tuvieron un poquito de vergüenza mis papás, en el sentido de que se preguntan que cuánto es basado en ellos
Sí, me
y
imagino.
les da como un poquito ah,
¿Así
de,
soy o no?
ajá, pero yo siento que les dije que lo tomé como inspiración, pero no es exactamente, ¿me
Sí,
entiendes?
claro.
Porque nada que yo he escrito es exactamente como mi vida y yo sé que la gente quiere que eso sea exactamente,
Mm,
pero tengo que recordar a la gente que no es documental y que no, todavía soy bien separada de
sí,
Gabriela y también mis papás son bien separados de eso, ¿me entiendes?
ujú. Sí, es solo otra
Am,
manera de ver
sí,
un personaje de, como decimos en inglés, de
ajá,
muchas dimensiones, ¿no?
ajá.
I'm going back to English so I can wrap up for people.
Oh, yes, 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 yes.
Where can people find out about the film if they're interested?
Absolutely. Right now, we're still on a lot of online streamers, so you can see it on Vimeo, you can see it through Umleto, Film Shortage, and actually in Canada, you'll be able to see it on, I think it's Tele Quebec. Is that what it's called?
Oh,
Or
okay, like
Quebec?
Telequebec.
Yeah, you'll be able to see it
Oh,
um, through that, but that starts, I believe, at the end of January.
oh, okay, no problem.
So yeah, and then that runs through the spring. So there will be options for Canadian audiences as well.
Nice. I'll make
Yeah.
sure to put it on my write up so people know where to click and
Oh
find
yeah.
you.
Yeah, I'll get you the exact name and I'll email it to you. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that'd be great.
it's really,
Um,
I was like,
that's
wow.
so
Okay.
great. Thank you for your time, Evelyn. It's been so lovely.
Oh
Um,
no, thank you. And I know that the holidays are here, so Nochebuena y
we need to
todo.
get ready for the tamales. I
Oh,
love the
they are
scene with the
ready. They are.
tamales.
Oh yeah,
Tamalitos.
I call them tamales because everybody,
No, I
I
know.
guess.
For us, it's chuchitos,
Oh,
but you guys make it
chuchitos. Yeah, I was
chuchitos.
gonna say it's chuchitos, but whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, we have tomorrow. I'm excited for my
Yeah, me
tamale.
too.
Yeah.
As I say, thank you, Tia, for
Oh,
making
right.
it.
Yeah, my mother and my cousin are making them, and yeah, it's my favorite part. Like I was like, we need to have them ready. And my
It's
brother,
always
my
so good.
brother, my brother he makes tamales for a living. Like he
Hmm.
has a whole thing in
Nice,
Atlanta,
nice.
and so yeah, we're big tamale family. Anyway,
Oh, I love it.
yeah.
Well, Feliz Nochebuena, Feliz Navidad. Thank you so much. A pleasure.
Gracias, sí. Mucho gusto.